Okay, this question says if 2 millimoles of hydrated copper sulfate, right, formula is given to us, is heated to dryness, then calculate the obtained mass of anhydrous copper sulfate salt. Simple question, simple logic here. What we are saying is that we are heating CuSO4.5H2. On heating this, anhydrous is obtained, which means that all H2O is removed. I have CuSO4 plus 5H2O, probably, which is escaped in the form of steam, right? Now point is, think about this, 1 mole of this is giving me 1 mole of copper sulfate, right? So if I had 2 millimoles of hydrated copper sulfate, obviously I'm going to get 2 millimoles of normal anhydrous copper sulfate also, right? So I have CuSO4, of which I have 2 millimoles. I need the obtained mass, right? So mass, what can you say about the mass or weight of the sample? Weight will be equal to number of moles into molar mass, right? So CuSO4, copper is given as 63.5. So 63.5 plus sulfur 32 and 4 oxygen is 64, so 96. Between the two of them I am getting how much? 0.59 and 159.5, approximately 160, right? Approximately 160. So what will I get? I am going to get 2 into 10 to power minus 3. Why 10 to power minus 3? Millimoles, right? 2 into 10 to the power minus 3 into 160. Let me take approximate value. What will I get? 320 into 10 to the power minus 3, or 0.32 grams, right? 320 into 10 to the power minus 3 is 320 divided by 1000, which is 0.32 grams, which is obviously what I can see in A option. Something that this question is based on information too, and something that you have to remember. So the question says, which of the following oxides is amphoteric? What is amphoteric? Oxide, which when dissolved in water gives you a substance which can react with both acids as well as bases, basically, right? So that is what you call as your amphoteric substance. Now looking at these, let's think about this. What will MgO give us? It will give us MgOH twice, which is basic, right? Not a very strong base, but yeah, basic nonetheless, right? So this is basic. As far as P2O5 is concerned, this gives us H3PO4, which is obviously acidic. SO3 gives us H2SO4, which you obviously know is acidic. Al2O3 gives us ALOH thrice. Now as far as ALOH thrice is concerned, it shows both what you call as your basic as well as acidic kind of behavior. That depends on what is added along with this. Something less acidic compared to ALOH thrice, if you have, less basic compared to ALOH thrice, if you have, then ALOH thrice will behave like a base. If like for example, let's say this will react with both NaOH as well as your HCl. It will give you AlCl3 with your HCl, and it will give you NaAlO2, right, with your NaOH, right? So NaOH is more basic. So with that, ALOH thrice is going to behave like an acid, and HCl is obviously acidic. So with that, ALOH thrice is behaving like a base. So here ALOH thrice is behaving like a base, and here it is behaving actually like an acid. So aluminum, zinc also, you've probably heard of these, right? So more amphoteric oxides you will study as and when you require them. When you go across P block, you will be studying more about this, and also in transition also you might study a few more. So yeah, point is, which out of these is like an amphoteric oxide? Obviously the correct answer is D option, Al2O3. The minimum number of waves made by a Bohr electron in an orbit of maximum magnetic quantum number plus 2 is, right? What is magnetic quantum number? Magnetic quantum number is going to range between minus L to plus L. Magnetic quantum number talks about the orientation of the orbital in space, right? And magnetic quantum number is supposed to lie between minus L to plus L, and the maximum value of M is going to be obviously plus L, and that is given to us as plus 2, right? Which means that L is 2, right? Now what can you say? If you are looking at L is equal to 2, we know that in first shell and second shell we don't have L is equal to 2. Of course, this is assuming that, of course, this given criteria that your maximum value of magnetic quantum number is plus 2, so obviously L has to be plus 2. Once you know that L is plus 2, we know that the minimum value of N will have to be 3, right? So we know that L varies from 0 to n minus 1, right? So for any n greater than 3, I can say that L can be 2, right? So L can be 2 in n greater than or equal to 3. So the minimum value of n will be 3. Now think about this. This is also mixing a little bit that we studied from what you call as de Broglie. So in de Broglie hypothesis, we speak about wave particle duality, and there we also said that mvr is equal to nh by 2 pi. The postulate that Bohr took, that angular momentum is quantized, is actually coming from the fact that n into h by mv, lambda equal to h by mv is equal to 2 pi r. Basically, your nth shell, right, nth orbit will be seeing n waves, and each wave has a wavelength of h by mv for an electron. In general, we know that de Broglie wavelength is h by mv. So n into h by mv is going to be your 2 pi r. Basically, if you remember, we say that, okay, let's consider fourth orbit. Fourth orbit is where the electron makes 4 waves. So there is one wave here, there is one wave here, there is one more wave here, and there is one more wave here. So we say that total circumference 2 pi r should be equal to 4 lambda or h by mv, and that is how we get this Bohr postulate mvr is equal to nh by 2 pi. Angular momentum quantization is a direct result of wave nature of electron, and we can say that in third orbit the electron will be making 3 waves, right? At least 3 waves is the final answer here. The minimum number of waves is what is asked. We can say minimum 3 waves will be there. Why? Because n minimum is 3. N is equal to 4, could also have L is equal to 2, could also have M is equal to plus 2 maximum, right? So N could have been 4, in which case there would have been 4 waves. N could have been 5, in which case it could have been 5 waves. But here what is said is that the minimum number of waves made by an electron in an orbit where M maximum value is plus 2 is what is asked. So the minimum is going to happen when N is minimum, which is 3. So what we can say is that the number of waves, minimum number, is going to be 3, which is obviously option A. Okay, this question says, which of the following statements is true for iO2 F2 minus? Right now, as far as this iO2 F2 minus is concerned, it's not something that is a common molecule that we come across that we can directly start drawing the structure or speak about the structure and all. Let's read the options anyways. It says the lone pairs are located in equatorial planes. It is sp3 hybridized and has T shape. Its structure is analogous to SF4. Both A and C. There are multiple options that are given here, right? And let's try to analyze. Okay, so how do we do this? First of all, before we go on to find shape or hybridization, we need steric number, right? So steric number is the number of sigma bonds plus number of lone pairs. Formula is number of half the number of valence shell electrons plus monovalent atoms minus charge on the central atom, right? Now as far as the central atom is concerned, we will obviously consider the one which is least in number, which can form maximum number of bonds, which is largest, and so on. And looking at all of these criteria, we can obviously say iodine is going to be the central atom here. Oxygen and fluorine are the most electronegative 2 elements, and they are normally not going to be fluorine is never a central atom here because iodine is there, which can show a larger valency of 7, right? After expansion, hence iodine will be the central atom. So here we are going to get a steric number of half of valence shell electrons in iodine is 7. Monovalent atoms, you can see fluorine atoms are there, so 2 fluorine atoms, and charge is minus 1, so minus means plus 1, right? So this is 10 by 2, which is equal to 5, which means we have sp3d hybridization, right? Which means we have this trigonal bipyramidal kind of geometry. Now when I'm looking at the number of surrounding atoms, I can see 4 atoms are there, right? Other than iodine, there are 4 atoms, 2 oxygen atoms, 2 fluorine atoms. Obviously all of these are going to have 1 sigma bonds with iodine, right? They can only have 1 sigma bond. Pi bonds might be there, as the case that we would see in oxygen, but yeah, point is that we know that there will be 4 sigma bonds. Steric number 5 means means that there is one lone pair as well, right? So iodine will have one lone pair and two oxygen atoms, most probably having double bonds with iodine. Obviously, in your trigonal bipyramidal structure, we know that we put lone pair on the equatorial plane, right? So lone pair will be on the equatorial plane, and double bonds are also normally, because fatter electron clouds, we preferably put them in the equatorial plane. So you will be getting a double bond over here, double bond over here. Most electronegative atoms are normally bound to go in the what you call as your axial position. So two fluorine atoms, I'll put them in the axial position, and there will be a lone pair in the equatorial plane. This is going to be the structure. Obviously, there is going to be a formal charge of -1 on my central iodine atom as well, right? Now looking at this, okay, so if I want to speak about the shape, okay, let's read the options one by one. The lone pairs are located in the equatorial position. Of course, we know this is true, right? In trigonal bipyramidal, this is a true statement. It is sp3d hybridized. True, very true. And it is T shape. Oh no, this is wrong, right? So this kind of a shape is what you call as a seesaw shape. This is not T shape. T shape would have been there if there were two lone pairs and 3 sigma bonds, right? I mean, minimum 3 sigma bonds plus maybe double bonds are also there, right? So yeah, we know that this statement is wrong because it's not T shape, it's a seesaw shaped one. Its structure is analogous to SF4. Yeah, true, right? So SF4 similarly has one lone pair and 4 fluorine atoms. Analogous would mean that we are not saying that it's exactly shape in every respect. We are just saying that they have similar shape, right? So yeah, we can see that SF4 also has a similar kind of a shape. So we can say that this is also a true statement. So obviously, what is the correct answer? D is the correct answer, which says both A and C are correct statements. Okay, this question says a vessel contains 100 liters of liquid X. Heat is applied to the liquid at a constant pressure of 1 atmosphere, right? In such a fashion that the heat given is equal to change in enthalpy. Of course, we know that under constant pressure condition, the heat given is equal to your delta H, right? So QP is equal to delta H. We already know this. The volume of liquid increases by 2 liters, right? So the volume of liquid is increasing by 2 liters because you are giving heat to the system as well, and it is probably expanding a bit, right? So liquids don't expand as much as gases. Yeah, that is what is happening here. If 202.6 joules of heat were supplied, then delta U delta H is what we are going to speak about here, right? So what can you say here when you are looking at this particular liquid, right? So first law is something that we can definitely speak about. We are also given the definite value of heat, right? So 202.6 joules of heat were supplied, which means that Q will be equal to plus 202.6, right? Now what do you know about heat under constant pressure? This is supposed to be equal to delta H. So delta H is already known to us as 202.6 joule, right? Now what else? We need to speak about delta U, right? So delta U is supposed to be equal to Q plus W. Q is already known to us. This is already delta H. It is already known, right? So what else is there? As far as W is concerned, see, we are looking at a liquid which is exposed to a constant pressure, right? So when you are looking at the expression for work done, we know I'm writing absolute top, okay? So work done is supposed to be equal to minus P external dV integration, right? So as far as external pressure is concerned, it's a constant. So it comes out of the integration sign. We end up getting minus P external delta V, right? Minus P external into integral dV, which turns out to be minus P external into delta V. Now, delta V, do I know this? Yes, we do. How? Because we know that the volume increases by 2 liters, right? So, it was originally 100 liters. It is now 102 liters. Volume change, delta V is 2 liters. So, work done can be written as W will be equal to minus P external into 2 liters, right? So which means that work done is minus 2 liter atmosphere, and 1 liter atmosphere is supposed to be how much? We know this, 101.3 joules, right? So 2 liter atmosphere would mean 202.6 joule, right? Of course, this is with a negative sign, right? Expansion is what is happening. Obviously, work done will be negative. So work done is negative 202.6. Heat is plus 202.6. Adding these two, you can obviously see delta U is becoming equal to 0. So basically this is isothermal process. This is an isobaric process that is happening. Delta U is turning out to be equal to 0, and your Q and W are basically of opposite signs. Heat given to it is 202.6 joules. So yeah, what do we see here? We are looking for delta H is equal to 202.6, but delta U is not this. This is also obviously wrong. This is also obviously wrong. We are not looking at minus. Yeah, so in D option, I can see that delta H is 202.6 joules, which is exactly what we were looking for, and delta U is 0. So both of these are exactly right. So final answer is D option.